June 4th, 1942, dawned with a deceptive calm over the vast Pacific. The horizon was painted gold by a rising sun that belied the cataclysm about to unfold 200 miles northwest of Midway Island. The codes were broken, the trap was set, and the flight deck of the USS Enterprise buzzed with the roar of engines as dive bombers and, in this reimagined history, a squadron of P-47 Thunderbolts prepared to strike the heart of Japan's Kido Butai. Admiral Chuichi Nagamo's four carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, steamed confidently toward what they believed would be another crushing victory. They were unaware that American cryptanalysts, led by Commander Joseph Rochefort in his basement bunker beneath Pearl Harbor's 14th Naval District headquarters, had spent months painstakingly cracking their JN-25 code. This breakthrough revealed their precise location and plans for weeks through intercepted radio transmissions that spoke of AF as the target. The target was confirmed when a clever ruse involving Midway's water distillation plant-generated Japanese reports of freshwater shortages so this allowed Admirals Chester Nimitz and Frank Jack Fletcher to position 3 carriers and a makeshift P-47 squadron on Midway's eastern island to spring, the most devastating ambush in naval history. Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown would be positioned strategically. Yorktown had been hastily repaired at Pearl Harbor in just 72 hours, with welding torches still hot from emergency hull patches. Lieutenant Junior Grade Norman Dusty Cly, a 26-year-old pilot from Coffeyville, Kansas, represented the heartland of America. His hometown had a population of 1,247. His father owned the town's only grain elevator, and his mother taught Sunday school at the Methodist Church. Cly had graduated from the Naval Academy in 1938, with a commission that took him from the wheat fields of his childhood to the rolling decks of aircraft carriers. He earned his wings at Pensacola in 1941, where he distinguished himself with exceptional gunnery scores and an innate understanding of aircraft handling that impressed even the most seasoned instructors. At 05:30 hours, he stood on Enterprise's flight deck. His weathered leather flight jacket bore the insignia of Fighting Squadron 6 and the newer patch of the hastily formed Thunderbolt Detachment. His eyes scanned the horizon as dawn broke over waters that had witnessed the deaths of so many young men in the past 6 months since Pearl Harbor. He was preparing to lead a detachment of 12 P-47 Thunderbolts, nicknamed the Jugs, for their bulky frames that resembled milk jugs when viewed from certain angles. This was a daring mission to provide air cover and strafe Japanese carriers. His experience from the Marshall Islands raids in February paled in comparison to the stakes today. In February, he had flown cover for the Doolittle Raiders' launch preparations and witnessed firsthand the devastating effectiveness of coordinated carrier strikes. Intelligence reports suggested the complete annihilation of Japan's carrier force could be achieved in mere minutes if the timing was perfect and the weather held. The P-47 Thunderbolt, Republic Aviation's heavyweight fighter, had been rushed to the Pacific Theater ahead of schedule. Army Air Force's Colonel Hubert Hub Zemke convinced Admiral Nimitz that the aircraft's exceptional range could provide unprecedented close air support capabilities. The range extended up to 1,030 miles with external fuel tanks. Each Thunderbolt mounted 8 Browning M2 50-caliber machine guns with 267 rounds per gun, totaling 2,136 rounds of armor-piercing and incendiary ammunition. This arsenal could shred enemy aircraft and turn carrier flight decks into infernos. The aircraft's 2,000-horsepower Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engine featured 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows of 9. This power plant generated enough thrust to propel the 14,600-pound fighter to speeds of 433 miles per hour at 30,000 feet. This made it one of the fastest production fighters in the world and certainly the most heavily armed. Cly had spent weeks at Kaneohe Bay learning the Thunderbolt's quirks and capabilities. from Army pilots who had ferried the aircraft across the Pacific. He discovered that while the P-47 lacked the nimble agility of the Navy's F-4F Wildcat, it possessed an almost supernatural ability to absorb battle damage and continue fighting. Its armor-plated cockpit provided protection that had already saved countless lives in Europe. Early combat reports described Thunderbolts returning to base with hundreds of bullet holes yet still flying. This earned the grudging respect of Luftwaffe pilots who nicknamed it Der Dicke, the Fat One. The term carried both derision and acknowledgement of its formidable capabilities. Inside the ready room at 400 hours, harsh fluorescent lights cast long shadows across navigation charts and target photographs. Cigarette smoke curled through the recycled air as Lieutenant Commander Clarence Wade McCluskey, Jr., Enterprise's Air Group commander and a veteran pilot whose steady hands and tactical brilliance had already made him a legend among carrier aviators, briefed the assembled pilots with methodical precision. His pointer tapped a large-scale map marked with the Japanese fleet's estimated position. 4 fleet carriers were arranged in a loose diamond formation approximately 200 miles northwest of Midway. They were accompanied by 2 battleships, 2 heavy cruisers, 1 light cruiser, and 11 destroyers. The entire force carried 248 of the world's most skilled naval aviators. These were veterans of Pearl Harbor, Wake Island, the Dutch East Indies, and Ceylon. These men possessed combat experience and tactical expertise that had made the Imperial Japanese Navy's carrier force the most feared naval aviation unit in history. McCluskey outlined Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's complex operational plan in detail. A diversionary attack by Rear Admiral Kakuji Kakuta's 2nd Carrier Striking Force against the Aleutian Islands would draw American attention northward. This would be followed by Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo's 1st Carrier Striking Force, attacking Midway from the northwest to eliminate the island's defensive capabilities. Admiral Yamamoto himself would follow 300 miles behind in the massive battleship Yamato, ready to engage and destroy any American naval forces that might appear. The entire operation was designed to force a decisive battle that would eliminate American naval power in the Pacific and open the way for Japanese expansion toward Australia and Hawaii. McCluskey's briefing revealed the extraordinary intelligence coup achieved by Commander Rochefort's cryptanalysis team, Station Shaipo. They had not only broken the Japanese naval code, but had also identified the specific radio frequencies used by each carrier division. This allowed American radio intercept stations from Hawaii to Australia to track the enemy fleet's movements with unprecedented accuracy. They knew not only the location, but also fuel status, aircraft readiness levels, and even personal communications between flag officers. This intelligence was so detailed that Admiral Nimitz had been able to position Task Force 16 and Task Force 17 in perfect ambush positions northeast of Midway. They could remain undetected while the Japanese approached from the northwest. Their radar screens remained clear of enemy contacts as the sun rose on what would become the most decisive naval battle in history. Fly, temporarily reassigned from Fighting Squadron 6 to lead the experimental P-47 detachment for this mission, felt a familiar shiver of anticipation mixed with fear as McCluskey revealed the scope of their advantage. American forces would know the enemy's every move hours before Japanese commanders made their decisions. Squadron Commander Lieutenant Earl Gallagher, a soft-spoken Texan whose calm demeanor masked a fierce competitive spirit honed during his college football days at Rice University, scribbled tactical notes in the margins of his kneeboard cards. Lieutenant Richard Halsey, Dick Best, Bombing Squadron 6's commanding officer, and one of the most skilled dive bomber pilots in the Navy, studied weather reports with the intensity of a scholar examining ancient texts. Southeast winds at 5 knots, scattered cumulus clouds at 1,500 feet, with tops at 3,000 feet, visibility unlimited except for occasional rain squalls. Surface temperature 78 degrees Fahrenheit. These were ideal conditions for the precision diving attacks that would define the day's action. The meteorological data painted a picture of perfect flying weather. Stable atmospheric conditions would allow the SBD Dauntless dive bombers to achieve maximum accuracy while giving the P-47s clear visibility for their strafing runs. The morning sun provided excellent illumination for target identification while casting shadows that could be used for concealment during the approach. Veteran pilots recognized these as conditions that were a gift from the gods of war. This was the kind of weather that separated the skilled from the lucky and rewarded preparation with success. By 0600 hours, as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern horizon, Enterprise's flight deck had transformed into a hive of coordinated activity that would have impressed any observer with its choreographed precision. Red-shirted ordnance. Crews worked with practiced efficiency to load 500-pound general purpose bombs onto the SBD Dauntless's centerline pylons and armor-piercing ammunition into the P-47's 8 wing-mounted Browning machine guns. Each weapon was capable of firing 850 rounds per minute, with a muzzle velocity of 2,840 feet per second. They delivered projectiles that could penetrate aircraft armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. Purple-shirted aviation fuel handlers topped off tanks with high-octane aviation gasoline. Each Thunderbolt carried 305 gallons in internal tanks, plus additional fuel in drop tanks that would extend their combat radius to nearly 400 miles. Brown-shirted plane captains and mechanics performed final inspections of the Thunderbolt's massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 engines. They checked oil levels, coolant systems, and the complex turbocharger assemblies that allowed the aircraft to maintain power at altitudes where enemy fighters would struggle for breath. Cly approached his assigned P-47, Bureau number 42, 7943. Its natural metal finish gleamed like polished silver in the deck lights. The aircraft's distinctive elliptical wings and razor-back fuselage gave it an aggressive appearance that matched its combat capabilities. His radio operator and rear gunner, aviation radioman second-class John Snowball Snowden, was a 19-year-old from Detroit, whose calm precision under fire had already earned him a reputation as one of the squadron's most reliable crew members. Snowden checked the twin .30-caliber machine guns mounted in the aircraft's rear cockpit. Their ammunition belts were loaded with a mixture of ball, armor-piercing, and tracer rounds designed to provide maximum effectiveness against enemy aircraft. The two men exchanged only a brief, "It's gonna be hot today, Snowball," and "Roger that, Mr. Cly," before completing their meticulous pre-flight inspection. Control surfaces moved freely through their full range of motion. Bomb release mechanisms were tested and armed. The fuel system was pressurized and leak-free. Radio equipment functioned on all assigned frequencies. The oxygen system was charged and ready for high-altitude operations. They knew that their lives and the success of the mission depended on the mechanical reliability of every component, from the smallest bolt to the massive propeller that would pull them through the sky at speeds their grandfathers could never have imagined. The Thunderbolt, despite weighing nearly 3 times as much as the Japanese Zero fighters they would face, possessed characteristics that made it uniquely suited for high-speed, high-altitude combat expected over the Japanese fleet. Its thick wings and robust construction allowed it to dive at speeds exceeding 550 miles per hour without structural failure. Its armored cockpit, self-sealing fuel tanks, and redundant systems provided a level of survivability that had already saved countless pilots' lives in the European theater. Thunderbolts had proven capable of absorbing damage that would destroy lighter aircraft and still returning their pilots safely to base. This earned a reputation as flying tanks that could dish out punishment and take it in return at precisely 0645 hours, with the sun now fully above the horizon and painting the Pacific in shades of gold and blue that reminded many of the young aviators of peaceful mornings back home. The USS Enterprise turned into the southeast wind and accelerated to 30 knots. Her massive flight deck angled into the headwind to provide maximum lift for the heavily loaded aircraft preparing to launch. The carrier's 4 steam catapults were ready to hurl fighters and bombers into the sky with enough velocity to overcome the tremendous weight of fuel and ordnance each aircraft carried. Similar preparations proceeded aboard the Hornet and Yorktown. Their combined air groups represented the most concentrated naval aviation striking force ever assembled by the United States Navy. Clyde's P-47 roared to life with a sound like controlled thunder. The R-2800 engine's 18 cylinders fired in perfect sequence as he advanced the throttle and felt the aircraft strain against its wheel chocks. The propeller's 4 blades cut through the air with a distinctive whistle that set Thunderbolts apart from every other fighter in the sky. Around him, 11 other P-47s warmed their engines and prepared for what their pilots knew would be either the most successful or the most catastrophic mission of their careers. The difference would be measured in seconds, of timing and degrees of luck that would determine whether they returned as heroes or joined the growing list of young men who had given their lives in the defense of freedom. The launch sequence began with the systematic precision that characterized all carrier operations. Each aircraft was positioned on its catapult with mathematical exactness. Pilots ran through final checks, while catapult officers verified that all systems were ready for the violent acceleration that would transform stationary aircraft into flying machines in less than 3 seconds. This process required perfect coordination between dozens of crew members whose training and experience had prepared them for this moment. Split-second timing would determine success or failure, life or death, victory or defeat in the most decisive naval battle of the Pacific War. As his Thunderbolt rolled forward onto catapult number 2, Clive felt the familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension that preceded every combat mission. Today, this was magnified by the knowledge that he was about to participate in an engagement that could alter the course of the war. His hands moved automatically through the pre-launch checklist, while his mind focused on the tactical situation ahead. 4 enemy carriers were defended by experienced pilots in highly maneuverable fighters. They were surrounded by anti-aircraft guns manned by crews who had been fighting for 6 months and knew their business. All of this was protected by a screen of destroyers and cruisers whose radar and lookouts would detect the American attack force long before it reached the target area. This was unless the element of surprise could be maintained, and the attack coordinated with the kind of precision that had made the U.S. Navy's carrier aviators the most feared naval pilots in the EAD world. The catapult officer's signal came at 6:52 hours. A sharp whistle was followed by the dramatic gesture that sent Clyde's P-47 hurtling down the flight deck with acceleration that pressed him back into his seat with a force equivalent to 3 times his body weight. The aircraft's wheels left the steel deck as its wings bit into the morning air and lifted him toward a destiny that would be written in the skies above the Pacific. His Thunderbolt joined 11 others in a climbing turn that took them to 19,000 feet. There they would maintain radio silence as they flew northwest toward the enemy fleet. Their fuel gauges showed full tanks and 175 miles of ocean to cover before they would see the Japanese carriers that had brought such devastation to Pearl Harbor, Wake Island, and every American installation they had attacked in the opening months of the war. The flight to contact took exactly 1 hour and 18 minutes. During this time, Cly had opportunity to contemplate the extraordinary chain of events that had brought him to this moment. From his childhood in Kansas, where the most dangerous thing he had ever seen was a tornado on the horizon, to his training at the Naval Academy, where he had learned the principles of leadership and honor that now guided his every decision. His flight training at Pensacola had taught him to master the skills of aerial combat that would soon be tested against the most experienced enemy aviators in the world. This morning's briefing had revealed that American codebreakers had provided their forces with an intelligence advantage unprecedented in naval warfare. This gave them the opportunity to turn the tables on an enemy that had enjoyed 6 months of uninterrupted victory in the Pacific. Maintaining strict radio silence as ordered, the P-47 formation flew at 275 miles per hour toward the coordinates provided by HIPO's intelligence analysts. Their navigation was aided by the crystal-clear visibility that allowed them to use celestial navigation techniques learned in flight school. Their pilots scanned the horizon for any sign of enemy aircraft that might compromise their approach. They knew that Japanese combat air patrols typically flew at altitudes between 15,000 and 25,000 feet. This put them in the same airspace where the American strike force would have to operate. This created the possibility of air-to-air combat that would alert the enemy fleet to the impending attack and potentially doom the entire mission to failure. At 0955 hours, Lieutenant Commander McCluskey spotted the wake of a lone Japanese destroyer. The vessel was apparently racing to rejoin the main fleet after some independent mission. Its course led directly toward the enemy carriers and provided the American strike force with a navigation aid that eliminated any uncertainty about the target's location. The white foam of the destroyer's wake cut across the blue Pacific, like an arrow pointing toward the most heavily defended naval formation in the Japanese fleet. Admiral Nagumo's 4 carriers continued their approach toward Midway. They were unaware that American aircraft were already within striking range and preparing to deliver the most devastating attack in the history of naval aviation. By 10:20 hours, the enemy fleet came into view. 4 massive aircraft carriers maneuvered in a loose diamond formation. Their flight decks were crowded with aircraft being refueled and rearmed for a second strike against Midway. Zero fighters circled overhead in defensive patterns that had proven effective against previous American attacks. Their pilots were confident in their aircraft's superior maneuverability and their own combat experience. They were unaware that they were about to face an enemy that combined superior intelligence, tactical innovation, and the devastating firepower of aircraft they had never encountered in combat. McCluskey's tactical assessment of the enemy formation revealed both opportunities and dangers. The Japanese carriers were indeed vulnerable during aircraft recovery and rearming operations. Their flight decks were crowded with fuel trucks, ordnance handlers, and aircraft in various stages of preparation. This created target-rich environments where a single well-placed bomb could trigger catastrophic secondary explosions. However, the carriers were also defended by an umbrella of Zero fighters whose pilots had been flying combat missions for 6 months and possessed an intimate knowledge of aerial tactics that had made them virtually invincible in every previous engagement. Their aircraft's exceptional climb rate and turning ability allowed them to dominate American fighters in every battle fought since Pearl Harbor. The attack order came over the radio at exactly 10:22 hours. McCluskey's voice was calm and professional as he directed his formations toward their assigned targets. Scouting 6, take the left carrier. Bombing 6, take the right carrier. However, confusion in the heat of the moment sent both dive bomber squadrons toward the same target, the carrier Kaga. This created an opportunity for concentrated attack, but left other enemy carriers temporarily unengaged. Clyde's P-47 detachment received orders to suppress anti-aircraft, fire from the screening destroyers, and cruisers, while simultaneously engaging any Zero fighters that attempted to interfere with the dive-bombing attacks. This was a mission that would require the Thunderbolts to operate at low altitude where their superior speed and firepower could be most effectively employed. Clyde nosed his P-47 into a steep dive that took advantage of the aircraft's exceptional high-speed handling characteristics. The Thunderbolt's turbocharger whined as acceleration pinned him back in his seat, and the altimeter unwound with frightening speed. 18,000 feet, 15,000 feet, 12,000 feet. Black puffs of anti-aircraft fire began to appear around his formation. Japanese gunners on the screening vessels scrambled to engage targets that were approaching at speeds and angles they had never encountered before. Their manual fire control systems struggled to track aircraft diving at velocities that exceeded anything in their training or experience. At 8,000 feet, Cly opened fire with his 850 caliber machine guns. The combined muzzle flash created a strobing light that was visible for miles as 6,800 rounds per minute poured from his aircraft toward the enemy carrier. Kaga, the armor-piercing and incendiary. Ammunition shredded through the carrier's unarmored flight deck and ignited fuel lines that had been exposed during rearming operations. His wingman, Lieutenant Robert Samuel Johnson, a future ace who would ultimately be credited with 27 aerial victories, concentrated his fire on the carrier's island superstructure. His P-47 absorbed numerous hits from 20mm cannon fire, but continued to fight thanks to its armored cockpit and self-sealing fuel tanks. This proved the aircraft's reputation for survivability under combat conditions that would have destroyed lighter fighters. At 2,500 feet, Cly released his 500-pound general-purpose bomb. The weapon fell away from his aircraft as he pulled back on the stick with enough force to generate 9 Gs of acceleration. The tremendous stress threatened to black him out as he leveled off just above the wave tops. Snowden shouted confirmation through the intercom that the bomb had struck near Kaga's forward elevator. The explosion tore through the flight deck and detonated among the armed and fueled aircraft that had been spotted for the second strike against Midway. This created a chain reaction of secondary explosions that transformed the carrier's hangar deck into an inferno of aviation gasoline and high explosives that would ultimately consume the ship. Simultaneously, Lieutenant Dick Best's SBD Dauntless struck the flagship. Akagi, with a perfectly placed 1,000-pound armor-piercing bomb that penetrated the flight deck and exploded in the hangar bay among dozens of armed Kate torpedo bombers and Val dive bombers. The blast ignited aviation fuel and ordnance in a catastrophic explosion that killed Admiral Nagumo's air operations officer and destroyed the carrier's fire suppression systems. This ensured that the flames would spread uncontrolled throughout the ship until she became a floating funeral pyre for hundreds of her crew members. While Kaga and Akagi burned, Lieutenant Commander Maxwell Franklin, Leslie led Bombing Squadron 3 from the Yorktown in a coordinated attack against the carrier Soryu. His SBDs dove through increasingly intense anti-aircraft fire to deliver their bombs. With the precision that had made American dive bomber pilots the most feared naval aviators in the Pacific, their attacks were coordinated with strafing runs by Cly's remaining P-47s. The 8 machine guns per aircraft created a devastating suppressive fire that silenced many of the carrier's defensive positions and allowed the dive bombers to approach their targets without the level of opposition they had expected. Cly's second pass over the enemy fleet took him directly over the burning carrier Kaga. There, he could see the devastation caused by the combined American attack. The flight deck was buckled and torn. Aircraft burned like torches. Crew members were abandoning ship as internal explosions continued to rock the vessel. The rising sun flag still flew from her mainmast, even as flames consumed everything around it. This was a symbol of defiance that would soon disappear beneath the waves of the Pacific. Along with 801 members of her crew, Lieutenant Johnson's P-47 had absorbed over 20 hits from enemy fire, including several 20mm rounds that had penetrated his engine cowling and damaged his oil cooler. However, the Thunderbolt's robust construction and redundant systems allowed him to maintain formation and continue fighting. His experience demonstrated the aircraft's legendary ability to absorb battle damage and continue operating under conditions that would have forced other fighters to withdraw from combat. This was a characteristic that would make the P-47 one of the most successful fighter aircraft of World War II. As Cly climbed back to altitude for another attack, he witnessed the destruction of 3 Japanese fleet carriers. Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu had their flight decks ablaze and their crews abandoning ship. This marked the most decisive few minutes in the history of naval aviation. American dive bombers and fighters had destroyed the heart of the Japanese carrier force and fundamentally altered the balance of power in the Pacific theater. This turned what had been a war of Japanese aggression into a conflict that would ultimately end with American victory. The fourth carrier, Hiryu, had been obscured by smoke and distance during the initial attack and continued to launch aircraft for a counterattack against the American fleet. Her air group commander, Lieutenant Commander Joichi Tomonaga, led 18 Val dive bombers and 6 Zero fighters in a desperate attempt to inflict damage on the American carriers that had achieved such devastating success against his own fleet. His aircraft carried the hopes of the entire Japanese task force as they flew southeast toward Task Force 16. They were unaware that American radar operators had detected their approach and that F-4F Wildcat fighters were already climbing to intercept them. Clyde's P-47 detachment, now reduced to 9 aircraft after combat losses and mechanical failures, received orders to provide cover for the American carriers against the incoming Japanese attack. Their superior speed allowed them to climb rapidly to 25,000 feet, where they could intercept the enemy formation before it reached the fleet. The Thunderbolt's exceptional high-altitude performance gave them a significant advantage over the Japanese aircraft. The enemy engines struggled to maintain power in the thin air above 20,000 feet. The interception took place at 1140 hours, approximately 50 miles northeast of the American task force. Clyde spotted the Japanese formation below and to the south. 18 Val dive bombers flew in tight formation, escorted by 6 Zero fighters whose pilots were scanning the sky for American interceptors. They were unaware that death was diving toward them from above at speeds approaching 400 miles per hour. The P-47s used their superior altitude and speed to achieve perfect tactical position for what would become one of the most one-sided aerial combats of the Pacific. Clyde's attack began with a high-speed diving pass that brought his 850 caliber machine guns to bear on the lead Japanese dive bomber. The concentrated firepower tore through the unarmored aircraft's engine and cockpit, killing the pilot instantly and sending the bomber spinning toward the ocean in flames. His wingmen engaged the remaining Vals with similar devastating effect. Their superior firepower and armor protection allowed them to absorb return fire from the Japanese rear gunners while destroying enemy aircraft with impunity. Lieutenant Johnson engaged 2 Zero fighters simultaneously. He used the P-47's superior diving speed to avoid their attempts to turn fight him. This was a tactic that had proven successful against American fighters in previous engagements, but was ineffective against the heavily armed and armored Thunderbolt. The P-47 pilot could simply dive away from trouble and return for another high-speed attack when conditions were favorable. This gradually wore down the more maneuverable but lightly built Japanese fighters through superior firepower and tactical patience. The aerial battle lasted only 12 minutes. In that brief time, Clyde's P-47 detachment destroyed 16 of the 18 Japanese dive bombers and 4 of the 6 Zero fighters. This effectively eliminated the counterattack that might have inflicted serious damage on the American carriers. The surviving Japanese aircraft returned to Hiryu with reports of a new type of American fighter that possessed capabilities far beyond anything they had previously encountered. These were aircraft that could absorb tremendous battle damage, while delivering firepower that could destroy enemy planes with single bursts. The destruction of the Japanese attack force cleared the way for a second American strike against Hiryu, the last operational carrier in Admiral Nagumo's fleet. Her flight deck was now empty of aircraft, and her crew desperately attempted to prepare for another launch that would never come. Enterprise and Yorktown dive bombers approached from the northeast, under cover of P-47 fighters whose presence ensured that no Japanese interceptors would interfere with the attack. Lieutenant Earl Gallagher led the final attack against Hiryu. His SBD Dauntless dove through moderate anti-aircraft fire to place a 1,000-pound bomb directly amidships. The explosion penetrated the flight deck and detonated in the hangar bay among the carrier's remaining aircraft. Clyde's P-47s strafed the ship's superstructure and defensive positions. Their machine guns silenced the anti-aircraft batteries that might have interfered with the dive-bombing attack. This ensured that every American bomber reached its target and delivered its ordnance with maximum effectiveness. By 1200 hours, all 4 carriers of the Japanese mobile force were burning wrecks. Their flight decks were destroyed, their aircraft lost, and their highly trained aircrews either dead or swimming in the Pacific. This represented a blow to Japanese naval aviation, from which it would never recover. The loss of over 200 experienced pilots and 248 aircraft in a single morning eliminated Japan's ability to conduct offensive carrier operations for the remainder of the war. American losses totaled only 35 aircraft and 74 aircrew members. This was a victory ratio that demonstrated the decisive advantage provided by superior intelligence, better tactics, and the unexpected effectiveness of the P-47 Thunderbolt in naval combat. Clyde's return to Enterprise took place in weather that had deteriorated significantly since the morning launch. Scattered rain showers and lowering cloud cover made navigation challenging and forced the American aircraft to rely on their radio beacons to find their carriers. The pilots' fuel gauges showed dangerously low readings after hours of combat maneuvering at high-power settings. Several aircraft ran out of fuel and ditched in the ocean within sight of the task force. Their crews were rescued by destroyer crews who had been standing by for such emergencies. The landing aboard Enterprise at 1347 hours marked the end of Clyde's participation in the Battle of Midway. His P-47 showed numerous battle scars, including 3 7.7mm bullet holes in the fuselage, 1 20mm cannon shell fragment lodged in the armor plating behind his seat, and damage to his left aileron that had made the aircraft difficult to control during the return flight. However, the Thunderbolt's robust construction had protected him and Snowden from serious injury while allowing them to complete their mission and return safely to base. They joined 8 other P-47s that had survived the day's combat and would fight again in future battles. The strategic implications of the American victory at Midway became apparent within hours of the battle's conclusion. Japanese forces throughout the Pacific received orders to assume defensive positions and prepare for American counterattacks that would begin with the invasion of Guadalcanal just 2 months later. The loss of their carrier force had eliminated Japan's ability to support offensive operations beyond the range of land-based aircraft. American forces gained the strategic initiative that would ultimately carry them across the Pacific to the Japanese home islands. Clyde's combat report, filed 3 days after the battle, provided detailed technical information about the P-47 Thunderbolt's performance in naval combat. He noted the aircraft's exceptional ability to absorb battle damage, its devastating firepower against both air and surface targets, and its superior high-altitude performance compared to Japanese fighters. These recommendations would influence the Navy's decision to request additional P-47s for carrier operations. This led to the formation of specialized fighter-bomber squadrons that would play crucial roles in subsequent Pacific campaigns. The human cost of the victory was measured not only in lives lost, but in the psychological impact on the surviving participants. These were young men who had witnessed the destruction of an entire enemy fleet in a single morning. Their memories would be forever haunted by images of burning ships and falling aircraft, the screams of dying men, and the roar of engines pushed beyond their design limits. These experiences would shape their understanding of war and their appreciation for the thin line between victory and defeat, heroism and tragedy, life and death in aerial combat. Lieutenant Johnson, whose P-47 had absorbed more battle damage than any other aircraft in the formation while continuing to fight effectively, would go on to become one of the leading American aces of World War II. His 27 confirmed victories included 24 German aircraft shot down during his subsequent tour in Europe. There, he would command the 56th Fighter Group and earn a reputation as one of the most skilled and aggressive fighter pilots in the European theater. His experience at Midway had taught him the importance of patience, tactical discipline, and the superior characteristics of American aircraft when properly employed. Snowden, Clyde's radio operator and rear gunner, received the Distinguished Flying Cross for his actions during the battle. His calm professionalism under fire and accurate gunnery had contributed significantly to their survival and success. His post-war career as a commercial airline pilot allowed him to share his wartime experiences with a new generation of aviators who would benefit from the lessons learned over the Pacific. In 1942, the P-47 Thunderbolt's performance at Midway led to its adoption by additional Navy and Marine Corps squadrons. The aircraft's long range and heavy armament made it ideal for the kind of extended-range combat missions that would characterize the Pacific Campaign. Its robust construction and survivability features proved invaluable in an environment where rescue of downed pilots was often impossible. This led to the production of over 15,686 Thunderbolts by war's end. These aircraft would fly more than 546,000 combat sorties and destroy 7,067 enemy aircraft while establishing a reputation for reliability and effectiveness that would make it one of the most successful fighter aircraft in aviation history. The technological innovations demonstrated by the P-47 at Midway, including its turbo-supercharged engine, armor protection, and concentrated firepower, would influence fighter design for decades to come. These established principles of survivability and effectiveness that would guide the development of jet fighters in the post-war era. The tactical employment of heavily armed, long-range fighters in support of naval operations would become a standard feature of carrier aviation. This led to the development of specialized attack aircraft that combined the roles of fighter and bomber in single airframes optimized for multi-role operations. Clyde's own career continued. Throughout the Pacific War, his experience at Midway had established him as one of the Navy's most skilled fighter pilots. This led to assignments with newer squadrons flying improved versions of the P-47 and eventually the P-51 Mustang. His combat record ultimately included 19 confirmed aerial victories and 47 ground attack missions that contributed to American success in campaigns from the Solomons to the Philippines. His leadership and tactical expertise made him a valuable mentor for younger pilots who would carry on the traditions established during those crucial early battles of the Pacific War. The broader historical significance of the Midway victory, enhanced by the unexpected effectiveness of the P-47 Thunderbolt in naval combat, marked the beginning of the end for Japanese expansion in the Pacific. The loss of their experienced carrier pilots and modern aircraft had created a gap in capability that could never be fully replaced. Despite desperate efforts to train new aviators and develop improved aircraft, the industrial and technological advantages possessed by the United States ensured that American forces would grow stronger with each passing month while Japanese capabilities steadily declined. Admiral Yamamoto's reaction to the disaster at Midway, communicated through intercepted radio messages decoded by Allied cryptanalysts, revealed the full extent of Japanese dismay at the unexpected defeat. His famous observation, that we have awakened a sleeping giant and filled him with a terrible resolve, proved prophetic as American industrial production reached levels that Japanese planners had never considered possible. This delivered aircraft, ships, and weapons in quantities that would overwhelm any defensive strategy the Japanese might devise. The psychological impact of the Midway victory on American morale, both military and civilian, provided the confidence and determination needed to sustain the long and costly campaigns that would follow. The knowledge that American forces could defeat the best the Japanese could offer served as a foundation for the strategic patience required to fight across the vast distances of the Pacific, island by island, atoll by atoll, until the rising sun flag flew over no territory outside the Japanese home islands. Cly's post-war reflections on the Battle of Midway, recorded in interviews with military historians and aviation enthusiasts, emphasize the role of preparation, teamwork, and technological superiority in achieving victory against a skilled and determined enemy. His experiences served as lessons for future generations of military aviators who would face similar challenges in different theaters of conflict. The fundamental principles of air combat remained constant even as technology evolved and new weapons systems were developed. The legacy of the P-47 Thunderbolt service at Midway extended far beyond its immediate tactical success. It established a pattern of American technological innovation and industrial capability that would characterize the remainder of World War II and influence military aviation development for decades to come. The aircraft's combination of firepower, protection, and range set new standards for fighter design while demonstrating that American engineering and manufacturing could produce weapon systems superior to those of any potential enemy. The memorial services held for the airmen lost at Midway, including the crews of 3 P-47s that had been shot down during the battle, served as reminders of the human cost of victory and the sacrifice required to preserve freedom and democracy against totalitarian aggression. Their names were inscribed on monuments that would honor their memory long after the details of individual combat actions had been forgotten by all but military historians and the families who mourned their loss. The technical lessons learned from the P-47's combat debut at Midway influenced the development of improved versions of the aircraft. This included the P-47D with its bubble canopy for improved visibility and the P-47N with extended range for long-distance escort missions. These modifications incorporated feedback from combat pilots like Cly, who had tested the aircraft's capabilities under the most demanding conditions possible. Their recommendations led to improvements that would save countless lives and enhance mission effectiveness throughout the remaining years of the war. The strategic deception operations that had preceded the Battle of Midway, including the false intelligence about Midway's water shortage that had confirmed AF as the Japanese target, demonstrated the crucial importance of signals intelligence and cryptanalysis in modern warfare. These capabilities would prove equally valuable in subsequent campaigns, as American codebreakers continued to provide tactical and strategic intelligence that gave Allied forces decisive advantages over their enemies. Admiral Nimitz's post-battle assessment of the P-47's performance led to requests for additional squadrons of the aircraft to be assigned to Pacific Fleet carriers. The Thunderbolt's proven effectiveness in both air-to-air and air-to-surface combat made it an ideal multi-role aircraft for the kind of diverse missions that characterized carrier operations. From fleet defense to ground attack to long-range escort duties that would become increasingly important as American forces moved closer to the Japanese home islands. The Japanese analysis of their defeat at Midway, based on debriefings of surviving pilots and examination of wreckage from shot-down American aircraft, revealed their surprise at encountering the P-47 Thunderbolt in naval combat. Their intelligence services had been unaware that the U.S. Navy was operating Army aircraft from aircraft carriers. This was a tactical innovation that demonstrated American willingness to experiment with new concepts and adopt successful technologies regardless of traditional service boundaries. Cly's reputation as a skilled combat pilot and effective leader led to his selection for advanced training programs that would prepare him for command positions in the expanding Navy Air Arm. His experience at Midway had demonstrated not only personal courage and skill, but also the kind of tactical judgment and leadership ability that would be essential for the complex operations planned for 1943 and beyond. American forces would begin the long drive across the Central Pacific toward Japan itself. The maintenance challenges associated with operating P-47s from aircraft carriers required significant modifications to standard Navy procedures. The aircraft's complex turbo-supercharger system and heavy weight demanded specialized equipment and training that tested the adaptability of carrier maintenance crews. Their successful integration of the Thunderbolt into carrier operations demonstrated the flexibility and professionalism that characterized American naval aviation. Throughout the war, the propaganda value of the Midway victory, enhanced by dramatic accounts of P-47 pilots strafing Japanese carriers and shooting down enemy aircraft, provided material for Hollywood films and popular magazine articles that helped maintain public support for the war effort, while inspiring young Americans to volunteer for military service. The heroic image of fighter pilots like Cly served as symbols of American determination and technological superiority that boosted morale on the home front. The intelligence windfall resulting from the capture of Japanese codebooks and technical documents recovered from the sunken carriers provided Allied analysts with detailed information about enemy capabilities and intentions. This intelligence would prove invaluable in planning future operations and developing countermeasures against Japanese weapons and tactics. The complete defeat of the mobile force had created opportunities for intelligence gathering that would pay dividends throughout the remainder of the Pacific campaign. Lieutenant Commander McCluskey's tactical innovations during the Midway attack, including the coordination between dive bombers and P-47 fighters that had proven so effective against enemy carriers, became standard procedures for future naval air operations. His experience and expertise contributed to the development of doctrine that would guide American carrier aviation for the rest of the war and influence post-war tactical development, the medical treatment of wounded air crew members. Both American and Japanese, following the battle, demonstrated the humanitarian aspects of military service that often went unnoticed amid the violence and destruction of combat. Navy medical personnel treated all patients, regardless of nationality, while gathering valuable information about combat injuries and developing improved treatment procedures that would save lives in future engagements. Cly's personal correspondence with his family in Kansas, portions of which were published in the local newspaper after appropriate security censorship, provided civilian readers with first-hand accounts of the battle and its significance. His descriptions of the burning Japanese carriers and the courage of his fellow pilots helped Americans understand the reality of modern naval warfare and the importance of supporting their military forces with industrial production and financial sacrifice. The technological competition between American and Japanese aircraft manufacturers, intensified by the performance disparities revealed at Midway, led to accelerated development programs on both sides. The Japanese rushed to produce improved fighters and bombers, while American companies refined existing designs and developed new aircraft that would maintain Allied superiority throughout the conflict. The P-47's success at Midway served as proof that American engineering and manufacturing could compete successfully with any foreign competition. The training programs established to prepare additional pilots for P-47 operations incorporated lessons learned from Cly's combat experience and that of other Midway veterans. Their first-hand knowledge of the aircraft's capabilities and limitations proved invaluable for instructors who had to prepare new pilots for combat in the minimum possible time. The urgency of wartime training compressed into months what had previously taken years to accomplish. The cultural impact of the Midway victory extended beyond military circles to influence American art, literature, and popular culture. The dramatic story of David defeating Goliath in the skies over the Pacific inspired novels, paintings, and films that would commemorate the battle for generations to come. Cly's story, and those of his fellow pilots, became part of the national mythology that defined American identity. During World War II and beyond, the international significance of the American victory at Midway provided encouragement to Allied forces fighting in other theaters. The news that Japanese naval aviation had suffered a decisive defeat reached resistance fighters in occupied Europe and encouraged them to continue their struggles against Axis occupation. The global nature of World War II meant that victory in the Pacific had implications for the fight against fascism. Worldwide, the evolution of carrier aviation tactics following Midway incorporated the lessons learned from the P-47's successful debut in naval combat. This led to the development of multi-role fighter squadrons that could perform both air superiority and ground attack missions with equal effectiveness. The flexibility demonstrated by Cly and his fellow pilots proved that properly trained aircrew could adapt to changing tactical requirements and employ different aircraft types as situations demanded. The economic implications of the American victory at Midway extended beyond the immediate military benefits to influence global financial markets and industrial planning. The demonstrated superiority of American aircraft and the devastating defeat of Japanese forces convinced neutral nations that the United States possessed the technological and industrial capabilities necessary to win the war. This led to increased cooperation and support that would prove crucial in subsequent campaigns. Cly's continued service throughout the Pacific War, including participation in the Guadalcanal Campaign, the Marshall Islands Operation, and the Philippine Campaign, provided him with a unique perspective on the evolution of American naval aviation. From the desperate early days of 1942 to the overwhelming superiority achieved by 1945, his experiences spanned the entire arc of the Pacific conflict and demonstrated the transformation of American military capabilities through improved technology, tactics, and training. The preservation of his P-47, Bureau number 427943, after the war ended, provided future generations with a tangible connection to the Battle of Midway and the aircrew who had fought there. The aircraft's battle scars served as silent testimony to the violence and courage that had characterized those crucial minutes over the Pacific. The fate of nations had been determined by the skill and bravery of young men flying machines at the limits of human endurance. The annual reunions of Midway veterans, including Cly and the surviving members of his P-47 detachment, provided opportunities for these aging warriors to share their memories and ensure that the lessons of their experience would not be forgotten. Their gatherings served as living history lessons for younger generations, who would inherit the freedom and democracy purchased with their sacrifice and courage. The scholarly analysis of the Battle of Midway by military historians and aviation experts continued for decades after the war's end. Their detailed examination of tactical decisions, technological factors, and strategic implications provided insights that would influence military planning and aircraft development well into the jet age. The principles demonstrated by Cly and his fellow pilots remained relevant even as the technology of warfare evolved beyond anything they could have imagined. The moral dimensions of the victory at Midway, achieved through superior intelligence gathering, tactical innovation, and individual courage, demonstrated that democratic societies could compete successfully against totalitarian regimes when their survival was at stake. The triumph of American forces served as proof that free peoples could organize themselves effectively for war while maintaining the values and institutions that made their freedom worth defending. Cly's post-war civilian career as a commercial airline pilot allowed him to apply the skills and experience gained during his military service to peaceful purposes. His expertise in aircraft operation and his understanding of weather, navigation, and emergency procedures made him a valuable addition to the growing commercial aviation industry. His military decorations served as testimony to his qualifications and character. The technological legacy of the P-47 Thunderbolt's service at Midway influenced the design of post-war military aircraft. The lessons learned about the importance of armor protection, concentrated firepower, and long range continued to guide fighter development, even as jet engines replaced propellers and missiles supplemented machine guns. The fundamental principles of survivability and effectiveness established during World War II remained valid throughout the Cold War and beyond. The The diplomatic consequences of the American victory at Midway extended throughout the Pacific region. The demonstration of American military capability encouraged neutral nations to align themselves with the Allied cause, while discouraging potential enemies from challenging American interests. The psychological impact of the decisive defeat inflicted on Japanese forces resonated far beyond the immediate tactical situation to influence strategic calculations throughout Asia and the Pacific. The personal relationships forged between aircrew members during the intense experiences of combat created bonds that lasted throughout their lives. Clyde's friendship with Snowden and his fellow P-47 pilots provided a support network that helped them cope with the psychological challenges of post-war adjustment. Their shared understanding of combat stress and survivor guilt created connections that civilian friends and family members could never fully comprehend. The technical innovations pioneered during the P-47's adaptation for carrier operations, including modifications to the landing gear, arresting hook and folding wing mechanisms, contributed to the development of improved naval aircraft that would serve throughout the remainder of World War II and into the post-war era. The engineering challenges overcome by Navy and Republic aviation technicians provided valuable experience that would benefit future aircraft development programs. The training value of the Midway experience for American pilots continued throughout the war. Veterans like Cly shared their tactical knowledge and combat techniques with newly trained aircrew members. Their hard-won expertise served as the foundation for the advanced training programs that would prepare American forces for the increasingly complex operations required to defeat Japan. The institutional memory of successful combat tactics was preserved and transmitted to new generations of military aviators. The industrial mobilization required to support American victory at Midway demonstrated the crucial importance of manufacturing capability in modern warfare. The P-47s that had performed so effectively had been produced in factories that had converted from civilian production in record time. Their quality and reliability served as testimony to American engineering skill and industrial efficiency that would ultimately overwhelm Axis production capacity. The environmental impact of the battle, including the thousands of tons of oil and debris from sunken ships that contaminated the waters around Midway, served as an early example of the ecological consequences of modern warfare. The long-term effects on marine life and ocean ecosystems provided lessons that would influence environmental protection efforts in post-war decades. Such concerns were necessarily secondary to the immediate requirements of national survival. Cly's role as a test pilot for improved versions of the P-47, including experimental models with enhanced performance and new weapon systems, contributed to the continuous improvement of American fighter aircraft throughout the war. His feedback from actual combat experience provided engineers and designers with invaluable data that could not be obtained through laboratory testing or theoretical analysis. This was the iterative process of development and refinement that characterized American aircraft production. The intelligence value of captured Japanese equipment and documents recovered from the waters around Midway provided Allied analysts with detailed information about enemy capabilities, tactics, and technological developments. This intelligence would prove crucial in planning future operations and developing countermeasures against Japanese weapons systems. The complete nature of the Japanese defeat had created unprecedented opportunities for intelligence gathering. The logistical challenges of operating P-47s from aircraft carriers required significant modifications to standard Navy supply procedures. The aircraft's complex maintenance requirements and heavy fuel consumption demanded specialized parts and equipment that tested the adaptability of the naval supply system. Successful integration of these requirements demonstrated the flexibility and efficiency that characterized American military logistics throughout World War II. 2. The psychological warfare implications of the Midway victory. Enhanced by dramatic accounts of American pilots destroying Japanese carriers with apparent ease, provided material for propaganda campaigns designed to demoralize enemy forces while encouraging American allies. The symbolic importance of defeating the same enemy forces that had attacked Pearl Harbor served as powerful motivation for continued sacrifice and effort on the home front. The medical research opportunities created by treating combat injuries sustained during the battle contributed to advances in trauma surgery, aviation medicine, and psychiatric treatment that would benefit both military and civilian populations. The concentrated experience of treating large numbers of similar injuries provided doctors with insights that would have taken years to accumulate under peacetime conditions. This knowledge would save countless lives in subsequent battles and in post-war medical practice. WWII's participation in war bond drives and public appearances following his return from combat provided civilian populations with first-hand accounts of American military success. His decorations and combat record lent credibility to appeals for continued support of the war effort. The personal connection between heroes and home front served as a crucial element in maintaining the national unity required for total war. The international military observer programs that allowed Allied officers to study American carrier operations and aircraft performance contributed to improved cooperation and standardization of tactics and equipment. The lessons learned from the P-47's successful deployment at Midway were shared with British, Australian, and other Allied air forces that would benefit from American experience and technological innovation. The long-term strategic implications of the Midway victory, including the shift from defensive to offensive operations that would characterize the remainder of the Pacific War, demonstrated the decisive importance of single battles in determining the course of entire campaigns. The destruction of Japanese carrier aviation in one morning had created opportunities for American expansion that would ultimately lead to victory over Japan. The preservation of combat records and personal accounts from the battle, including Clyde's detailed mission reports and personal diary entries, provided future historians with primary source material that would enable accurate reconstruction of events and analysis of their significance. The importance of documentation in preserving military history and learning from past experience was demonstrated by the wealth of information available about this crucial engagement. The technological competition spurred by the P-47's success at Midway led to accelerated development of improved aircraft on both sides. American manufacturers refined existing designs while Japanese engineers struggled to match the performance and survivability characteristics that had proven so effective. The wartime pressure for continuous improvement drove innovation at a pace that would have been impossible under peacetime conditions. The training legacy of Midway veterans like Cly extended well beyond the immediate wartime period. Their experience and expertise contributed to the development of post-war military aviation training programs that would prepare American forces for the challenges of the Cold War era. The lessons learned in combat against a skilled and determined enemy remained relevant even as the nature of potential conflicts evolved. The cultural memory of the Battle of Midway, preserved through monuments, museums, and annual commemorative events, served to remind future generations of the price of freedom and the importance of maintaining military preparedness. Clyde's story and those of his fellow veterans became part of the national heritage that would inspire Americans facing new challenges and threats in subsequent decades. The scientific knowledge gained from analyzing the performance of P-47 engines, weapons, and systems under combat conditions contributed to advances in metallurgy, aerodynamics, and mechanical engineering that would benefit both military and civilian applications. The extreme conditions of aerial combat provided a testing environment that revealed strengths and weaknesses that could not be discovered through normal operation. The diplomatic intelligence gathered through observation of Japanese tactical procedures and equipment capabilities provided American negotiators with valuable insights into enemy thinking and capabilities. This information would prove useful in post-war occupation planning and the development of policies designed to prevent future Japanese aggression. The comprehensive nature of the defeat had exposed many previously secret aspects of Japanese military organization. The economic analysis of the battle's cost-effectiveness, comparing the expense of aircraft, fuel, and ordnance expended against the value of enemy assets destroyed, demonstrated the efficiency of well-planned and expertly executed military operations. The favorable exchange ratio, achieved at Midway, served as a model for future campaigns and validated the investment in advanced aircraft and intensive training programs. CLI's post-war involvement in veterans organizations and military history preservation efforts helped ensure that the lessons and memories of Midway would be passed on to younger generations. His dedication to honoring fallen comrades and educating the public about the realities of combat served as an example of the continuing service, obligations that extended beyond formal military duty. TRATC, technological innovations developed during the P-47's adaptation for naval service, including improved landing gear designs, enhanced structural strength, and modified control systems, contributed to the advancement of both military and civilian aviation. The engineering challenges overcome during wartime development provided valuable experience that would benefit the entire aviation industry in the post-war era. The international recognition of American technological and industrial superiority demonstrated at Midway influenced global patterns of military cooperation and alliance formation. Neutral nations increasingly aligned themselves with the United States as they recognized American capability to provide effective military assistance and protection against Axis aggression. The demonstration of military effectiveness served as a foundation for post-war American leadership in international affairs. The environmental lessons learned from operating high-performance aircraft in Pacific conditions contributed to improvements in materials science, corrosion resistance, and maintenance procedures that would benefit both military and civilian aviation. The harsh conditions of salt air and tropical weather provided a testing environment that revealed previously unknown problems and solutions that would prove valuable in peacetime operations. The psychological research conducted on combat stress and pilot performance during extended operations provided insights into human factors that would influence aircraft design, training procedures, and operational planning for decades to come. The concentrated experience of high-intensity combat revealed aspects of human performance under extreme stress that could not be studied under laboratory conditions. WWII's memoir, published decades after the war, provided historians and aviation enthusiasts with detailed insights into the daily life of carrier pilots and the technical aspects of operating the P-47 Thunderbolt in naval combat. His first-hand account served as a valuable primary source for understanding both the human and technological dimensions of this pivotal battle. The influence of Midway veterans on post-war military doctrine extended throughout the armed forces. Their combat experience contributed to the development of air-sea warfare concepts that would guide American military planning during the Cold War. The integration of carrier aviation with surface forces demonstrated at Midway served as a model for future combined operations. The preservation of technical data and engineering specifications from the P-47s used at Midway provided valuable reference material for aircraft restoration projects and historical research. The detailed documentation of modifications and performance characteristics served as a resource for museums and collectors seeking to maintain authentic examples of these historically significant aircraft. The inspirational value of the Midway story, including Cly's personal example of courage and dedication, continued to motivate American military personnel throughout subsequent conflicts. The tradition of excellence established by World War II veterans served as a standard that would guide future generations of service members facing new challenges and threats to national security. Their legacy lived on through the continued service of the men and women who followed in their footsteps. They carried forward the values and traditions that had made victory possible in humanity's greatest conflict.